For our first topic, I want to return to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. We spoke a bit about China's attempt to remain neutral last week, condemning violence against citizens but refusing to call out Hamas by name. Miles, could you give us an update? Where is China now on this front? In your estimation, have they clearly chosen a side, or are they still trying to thread the needle?
Well, China is secretly giddy about the crisis in the Middle East because that will alleviate pressure on China, because China has been the focus of international counter measures, because China has become a global pariah and the leading source of political and geopolitical instability in the large region. So now you have this crisis in Israel and Gaza. So China saying, haha, good. In a way that China has been very subtle and in playing this opportunistic game. China has never, since the beginning of the Hamas atrocities on Israel, condemned Hamas for its egregious atrocities. China has never named Hamas for its action. And China has never called Hamas as the culprit of this current crisis. So the silence, the cynical silence, has sort of alienated the Israelis' officialdom. And a few days ago, the relative of the Israeli diplomat was stabbed and wounded very seriously in downtown Beijing. So this is basically China has been fanning this kind of anti-Israel, pro-Hamas rhetoric in its completely controlled information environment. And this is very unfortunate. And now, when Israel is launching a massive pushback against Hamas and move into Gaza, China suddenly say, we got to condemn Israelis' excessive use of violence, and we are for the safety of the civilians. And China's foreign policy czar, the Politburo member, Wang Yi, and made a special call to the Saudi foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan. And in a phone call, which is published, Wang Yi said, Israelis' action has gone beyond self-defense. This is all to alienate Israel. Israel sent a deep regret to the Chinese statement. And by the way, China is the only country that has refused to organize evacuation of its own citizens from Gaza and Israel. And those Chinese citizens stuck in Israel and Gaza are furious with Chinese embassy and Chinese consulates. This is very cynical. You recall in 1999, during the bombing of Belgrade by NATO, China was the only country that maintained full-staffed diplomatic personnel in its embassy in the midst of the war. Russia, everybody is evacuated. And the actual bombing of the Belgrade embassy of China created a martyrdom for many Chinese citizens. So that's the beginning of this pervasive anti-America sentiment as a foreign policy. Imagine if those trapped Chinese citizens in Gaza or in Israel were killed. I can guarantee you Chinese government is going to use this tragedy to blame the Israelis for its self-defense measures. So this is all very cynical play by the Chinese government. There's nothing new about this.
I want to press a little bit further on something you just said. China's fanning the flames in their own closed media environment. Would you say that there is any difference between the way China is presenting itself internationally on this issue versus their domestic media narratives, or are those largely consistent?
Oh, it's very different. Domestically, China's stand, the government stand, is very clear. It has leaning on one side and created the domestic propaganda environment that is decisively on the side of the Hamas. So there's no question. If you're coming out in open to take side on the Israeli side, you're on the risk of being busted, period. Internationally, China is more cynical and more muted and more subtle. So they're looking for the opportunity to blame Israel for all the problems, regardless of what Israel's enemies are doing and have been doing. China right now is really trying very hard to sacrifice its developing relationship with Israel and to take Saudi Arabia, Iran, and all those anti-Israeli forces, even Egypt, into its own political orbit, and to be the leader of that group. Its only purpose is to treat Israel as an ally of the West. And so China will be the leader of the anti-West coalition. That's very clear to me.
One final piece on this would be the Chinese people. I'm not sure, I mean, they have a lot going on at home right now. So I guess this is kind of two questions. To what degree is this on the mind or an important issue for ordinary Chinese citizens? And are you seeing people speak out in a different direction on social media or anything like that? Or are they largely kind of staying quiet or going along with the government narrative?
Well, most people are facing their daily routine, their daily woes. I mean,
of course.
So they probably do not really as particularly active as many in the West. But also, China is a big country. There's a lot of netizens. They can express their views. The only problem is their views were all siphoned through this massive surveillance system, censorship system. Mm-hmm. So all you can hear and see on China's cyberspace and the internet, WeChat, are those that are in compliance in the Chinese government position. Now, there are some scholars who can use information platforms, social media, to express different views. There is one professor, for example, from Shanghai. He has been able to speak on the evolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict on this issue over an hour long. Has been very popular in the last several days on YouTube, only YouTube, which is not available to ordinary Chinese citizens inside China. But if you have some decent internet savvy and IT knowledge, you can basically climb the Chinese firewall and to watch those videos. So officially, China has a very strong grip and control over what message is allowed, what message is not allowed. But unofficially, there are always ways to find the dissenting voices. It's difficult.
For our next topic, today, Vladimir Putin is arriving at the third Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. He attended the two previous forums in 2017 and 2019, and in preparation, he made several statements praising the BRI, framing it as a framework for global cooperation and opportunity, set against what he called projects pursued by countries with a colonialist flavor. He said of the BRI, no one imposes or forces anything on anyone. They only provide opportunities. And in other statements, he pushed back against the narrative that the BRI has struggled to achieve what it set out to do. Miles, are these statements just par for the course for Putin and Xi Jinping's relationship, or is there some special significance about this particular summit? And as a corollary, zooming out at the broader picture, what is the state of the BRI today?
Putin has been very disingenuous when making those statements. He said, BRI is not a colonial project. The irony is Russia is perhaps the only big country in the world that does not allow BRI projects and infrastructure projects inside Russia as robustly as many other countries. China and Russia's economic engagement is cozying up, but that's only limited in trade, in commodities, not projects. China owns very little infrastructure project inside Russia because Putin knows Chinese BRI itself is a very colonial enterprise. So he's no dummy. So when he say BRI is unlike this colonial enterprise by other Western countries, it's total nonsense. Russia and China share very different visions when it comes to Chinese funded BRI projects. Vladimir Putin's main concern is to use Chinese capital to develop the Russian Far East, Siberia in particular. But Siberia is not on the BRI route of China. So China has been very lukewarm in sort of embracing Russia's idea of infusing a lot of Chinese money in Siberia. You have this pipeline deal it's been talking about for over 20 years. China has said yes at one moment and then never put any action, never funding in there. So this is the issue that Russia has to sort of be very careful and be persistent on China. Ask China to basically, hey, listen, you got to provide more support if you want the BRI. Vladimir Putin held a Far East Economic Forum in September in the Russian Siberian city of Vladivostok. China was not very gung-ho about that. I mean, no other major country actually went there. I think one of the highest foreign dignitary was the vice president of Laos. So it's very, very pathetic in a way. So Russia wants to develop its Far East. Why? Because if Far East remain underdeveloped, it's going to face a major challenge from China. So that's why Putin's idea of developing Russia Far East has also a sort of a check on China intention. Now, you ask about where we are on the BRI enterprise. China has been foolishly spending enormous amount of money, by the trillions, in developing BRI for its geopolitical purposes. Now, in some countries who are desperately in need of cash, yes, BRI remained very popular because it provided alternative to Western assistance. Because China normally used this BRI money to bribe the elites in a very secret fashion. But in most countries nowadays, they realize that BRI is a very double-edged sword. It could be a debt trap. And more countries are realizing this. And everywhere BRI has a major footprint, you have a political crisis because every country now is who are receiving the BRI money and Chinese money is assessing its political risk. So virtually in all countries that has heavy BRI investment, China has become a major presidential or parliamentary election issue because of the nature of the money. Now, you talk about the BRI right now. China wants to have a big kumbaya, big powwow in Beijing showing its global leadership. But none of the Western countries were going there. I think, in addition to Putin, the only leader of noticeable significance is the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary. And that's it. So I think that BRI is facing a lot of challenges, and everybody understands right now BRI is a lot of times built on empty promises because China's development model, including BRI, is based upon massive debts. So that debt somehow is going to be paid. And the BRI project, in essence, is also a bubble. So at some point, the bubble will burst. So Putin said Russia-China's trade has gone up in the last year to year, something like 30 to 40%. That's mostly in commodity trading. And Russia's trading with China actually is not done mostly between Russia and China. Russia said, we are dealing with China through a trading bloc, what they call the EAEU. There's a Eurasia Economic Union. President Russia, as a leader of this EAEU, the members would include Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia. So that's why Russia tried to sort of hold on to its traditional sphere of influence in the former Soviet republics and to fend off China's penetration into those countries. So this is Russia's design. And don't forget, Russia remains very friendly with almost all of China's regional rivals and adversaries, particularly India and Vietnam, and to a certain degree, ASEAN. China's relationship with ASEAN is not nearly as friendly as Russia's relationship with ASEAN. Vladimir Putin actually hosted a Russia-ASEAN summit a few years ago in Sochi, Russia. And all the leaders from ASEAN countries went. And if you read the concluding statement from that Russia-ASEAN summit, it has many very serious digs at China that include, adherence to freedom of navigation, right? Respect for sovereignty, all those coded words targeting China.
Our last topic, the Chinese real estate market is continuing to spiral, with Country Garden very clearly signaling it is en route to default with about $187 billion in liabilities. The founding family is reportedly selling off its private jets in a last-ditch effort to cover expenses and has already loaned the firm $300 million with zero interest. A recent New York Times article on this issue framed Country Garden as what appeared to be an outlier in the Chinese real estate market for the last 2 years, being, quote, a rare example of a fiscally responsible Chinese real estate firm. Miles, I want to ask, is this characterization true? And if so, what does that say about the broader economic situation China finds itself in if even responsible firms are collapsing?
More and more people in the world are realizing the entire Chinese model of economic development is a sham. To a certain degree, it's a Ponzi scheme because it has no solid basis. China's real estate market is in the tanks right now. We know that one of the largest real estate giants in China, Evergrande, has gone busted. And the people have paid a lot of attention to Evergrande because Evergrande is much more flamboyant and glitzy, focusing on high-end, first-tier cities, commercial real estate and residential real estate as well. Now, Country Garden is different. Country Garden has been known as a low-key, a model of good business, focusing on developing residential housings in the second, tertiary, and fourth-tier cities across the country. So it has enormous units, a number of units in across the country. The problem is it couldn't sell as robustly as before. So because China's overall economy and consumer confidence is all eroding. So that's basically created a major problem for Country Garden. Chinese call it the 碧桂园. So this massive portfolio all over China is now in crisis. The Country Garden's collapse is only a matter of time because it has not been able to meet several of the debt payment deadlines. And it's a stock, basically is now like a junk stock. Today, as we speak, Country Garden stock is traded at 9.5 cent per share. That's down by more than 91% from its high only a few years ago. So this is basically is a real estate giant that cannot be salvaged. The major impact is going to be much bigger than the Evergrande collapse because it involves so many countries across the nation. That's the problem. Much of the Country Garden's problems actually is caused by the Chinese government. It's in addition to this normal market fluctuation, but Chinese Communist Party has been killing the Country Garden. One example is that Country Garden, in cooperation with the Malaysian government, has built this paradise called the Forest City. It's a total flop. The total investment is over $100 billion. Now it's become a ghost town. The Forest City in Malaysia occupies over 4,300 acres. It has 26,000 units. The average price for a unit in that Forest City is about $500,000. It's very expensive. The local Malaysian could not really afford to buy that. So the Forest City was designed to attract wealthy Chinese customers to buy, and it has a capacity to accommodate about 700,000 people. But then, of course, with the Chinese economic collapse, very few Chinese could really afford to buy anything, let alone overseas. But most importantly, because the Chinese government makes it impossible for any wealthy Chinese from China to buy properties in countries like Malaysia because of the severe and the strict currency export control. Chinese government allows each individual per year only $50,000 transfer from domestic account to overseas account. That cannot really work for anybody who wants to buy property in countries like Malaysia. That's the most important reason why the forest city go busted. Chinese government also have this exit passport control, so they don't want the Chinese people with money to go abroad because they want the money to be spent inside to stimulate this dual circulation, as the Chinese government calls it. And on the other hand, this massive project overseas is a megalomaniac design by the developers. Also made a lot of local resistance in countries like Malaysia. They're worried about Chinese influence. So Malaysia vow it will not become the next Cambodia. So that's why Country Garden has both domestic and international woes, and I don't think they can overcome. So the collapse of Country Garden, in my mind, is imminent. It could happen any moment.
For a final question, I want to get your thoughts on the broader strategic picture that these disparate elements we've been talking about point to. When we talk about China's economic issues and when we look at other conflicts cropping up, whether it be Ukraine or now Israel and Hamas, a question on people's minds is how these geopolitical events set the stage for a potential PRC move on Taiwan. Experts have disagreed thus far as to whether increasingly dire economic situation for China will make it more or less likely that they will make a move in the near term. With the Middle Eastern conflict right now, Iran being a sort of wild card whose engagement could potentially draw on the U.S., and China's economic situation placing increasing political pressure on Xi Jinping, do you think we're seeing a perfect storm come to fruition where China may be poised to increase its aggression? Or do you instead think that the economic collapse will have the effect of turning China away from its international ambitions to some degree and towards an increasing focus on its own domestic troubles?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball in my hand, but let me just pretend that I had one in my hand. Yes, we have shifted our strategic focus away from Europe, from the Middle East, to focus on China, because China threat is number one and bar none. So war in Ukraine, crisis in the Middle East obviously create distraction for that American strategic focus. That's why crisis like in the Gaza Strip and in Israel really is a test of Americans' leadership. So far, from what I've seen, despite the temptations to get America involved again in those very troubled area, United States strategy has been to stay away from further involvement militarily and geopolitically in those troubled spots. We rely on friends and allies. In this case, we beef up Israel's own self-defense capabilities so that we don't have to go in. As a matter of fact, we have never gone in direct military involvement in the Middle East. So we stay focused on that. Now, on the Chinese side, obviously, they would prefer to have some kind of strategic distraction somewhere else, so China could have a free hand to do its number on Taiwan. And that's also it's kind of foolish thinking because think about this. If economic situation in China is dire, what would the military action do to that economic condition? Would it further its economic dilemma and trouble, or would it actually solve any economic problem? So Chinese leader knows. I mean, it's not going to solve any problem domestically because it has nothing to do with the Taiwan scenario. So a military action on Taiwan would also deny China enormous opportunities to continue this engagement with the international financial system, technological exchange. So that will be devastating for the Chinese development. If you were a Chinese leader, you would have to consider all these factors. So it's not just that there are crises somewhere else, so China could go in and execute its plan against Taiwan. The United States, for all practical purposes, still remain focused on China. So I am pretty sanguine and optimistic about this particular scenario that you provided. That's my crystal ball prediction.